we all know very well that saying, "Be still and know that I am." And there's no doubt that you also know that little anecdote about the Buddha who was walking down the road when a man coming towards him was blinded by his effulgence, the light emanating from him. And he said, "Who are you? Who are you? Are you an angel? Are you a spirit?" And the Buddha said, "No, I'm awake." We've been exploring the arcane laws, the mysteries, so-called, those laws that can only be known when we live in a state of eternal stillness and perpetual movement. That place where they meet, out of which arises the enactment of these arcane laws, so-called. Let's see if this story enables us to pinpoint one of those laws. This story has many variations in many different persuasions, but this one is more explicit, we might say. Let's see where it leads us. There was a couple, now in their middle age, who were pious, kept to the adherence of their faith and the laws of the land of the day. But they'd reached middle age without having any children, and they longed so much for a child. But according to their faith, one day in the year, the heavens would open, and prayers that were offered up had the possibility of being answered. So on the eve of this day, the couple fasted and went through the rituals that were required of this plea. And after a day and an evening of vigil, at midnight, it seemed that the heavens did open, and they felt their prayer rising up to the highest. During the remainder of that night, the wife had a dream. She dreamt that a celestial being came to her and said, "You will give birth to a child, and that child will be in possession of a jewel, a stone. This stone contains her soul. And if she is separated from this gem, she will fall into a deep sleep." Now, in the morning, when the wife told the husband about this dream, they knew in their heart that indeed this child would be born. And 9 months later, the wife gave birth to a beautiful daughter. Clutched in her hand was a glowing stone. Now the couple were very fearful, remembering the dream that if she was separated from this stone, she would fall into a deep slumber. So the father made a throng, and the stone was placed around her neck. They kept very close watch on this beloved and special child. But at the age of 4 years old, she picked up her mother's flute and began to play the most exquisite song. And thereafter it was found that any instrument that came into her possession, she was able to create the most wonderful music. Not only this, but she taught herself to read and to write. She read the ancient books of their faith. She was indeed an extraordinary young being. She grew to be a beauty of great, great renown. But she was kept very protected by her parents. But one day, the queen was coming to the bathhouse, and all the women went to flock around for this auspicious occasion. Now the daughter, who was called Kohava, which means star, longed to go with the other women to the bathhouse to be in the presence of the queen. Very reluctantly, her parents allowed her to join the throng of women. But when she arrived at the bathhouse, and the women of the town saw her, they were overwhelmed by her beauty. They remarked amongst themselves that she was even more beautiful than the queen. Well, this came to the ears of the queen. And when indeed the queen set eyes on Kohava, it was very apparent that she was far more beautiful than she herself. The queen was very jealous and said, "I believe that you can play an instrument." And she handed Kohava a harp. Kohava played the sounds that brought tears to the eyes of the women who were there. But the queen was overcome with envy, which clouded her ability to hear these marvelous sounds. She immediately plotted to bring Kohava to her palace, using the pretext that she wanted her music to be heard by all who lived in that great edifice. Now the mother and father were very reluctant, but could not go against the wishes of the queen. So the beautiful Kohava was sent to become a servant of this monarch. But as soon as she arrived at the palace, she was placed in a dungeon, left to starve. Kohava was distressed and distraught, but her beauty and her gentleness touched the heart of the guard, and he slipped food to her from time to time. Now one day, the queen decided to check on whether she was dead yet. So she descended to the dungeon and was greatly surprised to see that Kohava was still in the land of the living. But in the darkness of the dungeon, she could see the glowing gem that Kohava had around her neck, and immediately coveted this stone. She grabbed the thong that held the stone and yanked it away from Kahava's throat. And Kahava immediately fell into a deep swoon. Ah, thought the queen, at last I've got rid of her. And she ordered the guard to take Kahava's body out into the deep forest and bury it. Taking the jewel, she left the guard to do his task. But the guard could see that Kahava was merely asleep. And so he took her to a huntsman's hut deep in the forest and lay her gently there. In the days that followed, it so happened that the queen's son, who she loved dearly, ventured out on a hunt into that very same forest. Of course, the prince came upon the shack, and when he entered in and saw this beautiful being, he immediately fell in love, but was greatly distressed when he could not awaken her. But he set a guard outside the hut, and he went back, and every day he came to check and bask in her beauty. And then one day he said to his mother, the queen, I have found the one that I wish to marry. The queen was greatly pleased. I'm so glad you found a princess to wed. We must give her a suitable gift. Here, take this gem. And so the prince took the stone that Kahava had worn around her neck, and as soon as he placed it on her chest, she awoke, asking, Who are you? And the prince told her. Of course, when she heard the story, she knew that this was the son of the one who had imprisoned her and taken from her her precious possession. She told the story to the prince, who immediately knew that she was in great danger. So leaving her in the shack, he returned to the palace, where preparations for his wedding were taking place. On the day that he was to be wed, Kahava was brought to the palace wearing 7 veils, so no one could see her face. But after the ritual ceremonies were over and the veils were removed one by one, and her beauty was revealed, everyone gasped, but the queen was horrified, and believing that she was seeing a ghost, she ran screaming from the palace, never to be seen again. We know the end of the story. Kahava and her prince, who became the king, lived happily for the rest of their days. has this story got to do with these laws? What is it that this stone, in this story, said to contain the soul, represent for you? Remember, be still and know that I am. And the Buddha stating, I'm not a spirit, I'm not an angel, I'm not a celestial being, I'm awake. What could be the law that is implicit in this story with its representation of the jewel, the gem, the light, the glow, its emanation? What does it represent for you?
It's a spirit that can be separated from all of us with one meditation.
To me it means that awakening is inevitable, awakening from the veils of Maya, of illusion, and that we came here with that innocence and the connection to the divine. It's inevitable.
Of course.
We have to awake.
Yes. Yes. But the law that becomes evident from this, the law that we can see now in operation, when we look at those souls and we look in their eyes, and we can see they're separate somehow from their light, asleep. Isn't it so? What is this law? Look at where you've been and where you are now. Where you know that in the presence, the stillness in which we abide, when there's nowhere to go, nothing to do and nothing to be, and the movement of life moves in and meets that stillness. What is it that arises for us? What is it that becomes evident to us with that meeting? Out of that presence.
Oneness.
Yes, indeed. In the story it says playing any instrument, making any music. What does that mean?
Perceptions. Interpret perceptions.
Yes.
And-
Yes.
And when it's needed in now.